All right, welcome back to the War of 1812. So last time we had talked about the declaration of war. We'd ended. Basically, the vote was split on regional lines, 79-49 in the House, 19-13 in the Senate, and we started with an invasion into Canada to the city we call Toronto. Back then was called York. All right, so to start the war off, the U.S. just assumed the Canadians would welcome Americans and quickly join the U.S. to get the British out of North America. But again, this did not happen. We tried this back in the American Revolution and it didn't work, and it doesn't work here. Later that year, 1812, Britain blockades the eastern seaboard. So basically, ships were not allowed to leave or enter kind of the U.S. coastline. And that obviously cuts down on trade, which made the war even that much more unpopular in the Northeast. Remember, people in the Northeast were already opposed to the war because they knew it was going to impact trade. Now they are really against the war because it's actually happening. A guy named Oliver Hazard Perry, Oliver H. Perry, defeated the British on Lake Erie in 1813. This was significant because it basically gave America secured our control of over that Great Lakes region. Perry is famous for screaming to his men, "Don't give up the ship. Don't give up the ship." Also in 1813, William Henry Harrison. He was commanding officer of the forces out in the Northwest Territory, and he had already done battle at the Battle of Tippecanoe a couple years earlier, and now at the Battle of the Thames. It looks like Thames, but it's actually pronounced the Thames River. At the Battle of the Thames, Chief Tecumseh is killed, and his Red Stick Confederacy in the West is then destroyed. So that William Henry Harrison kind of starts to rise to prominence. He will go on to become our 9th president. And he's a guy that serves the shortest term of office, served for 40 days. He unfortunately gave his inauguration speech in a cold rainstorm, caught pneumonia, and died 40 days into office, unfortunately. All right, moving on. The roof is on fire. Yes, Washington, D.C. was set ablaze and in August of 1814. In particular, they set fire to the White House and the Capitol. Luckily, thunderstorms helped put out the fires. So that was really important. Could have completely burnt them down. And it wasn't called the White House at the time. It was called the Presidential Mansion. When they repainted it to paint over the smoke damage, they painted it white. Prior to that, I think it had been kind of a grayish color. James Madison actually barely escapes. James Madison has the distinct honor of being the very first president to ever ask for a declaration of war against a foreign enemy. And then he also has the distinct honor of being the only president to actually take fire in the White House by a foreign enemy. Dolly Madison, James's wife, is famous for having risked her life to save a portrait of George Washington. Fairly famous portrait of him that was hanging and obviously could not have been replicated because Washington had passed on by this time. So for it to be a live painting like that was pretty important, and she risked her life to save that. I do have a replica of that in my room, actually. So we're going to get up and take a little step over here. And I don't know if you can see that picture, that portrait of George Washington standing there holding a sword in his left hand and kind of holding out his right hand. That's the portrait that Dolly Madison saved. All right. Star Spangled Banner. So unlike Washington, D.C., Baltimore was actually ready. The British were then heading their way to Baltimore because that was kind of acting as the temporary seat of government as most government officials fled from D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland. The city militia, though, was ready to go and inflicted heavy casualties on the British. There was a fort there called Fort McHenry, and the British bombarded it with cannon fire. And there was a lawyer who was on a ship and was there to secure the release, I think, of one of his clients. And basically, he started scratching down on a piece of paper, writing down what he was witnessing. And so he was witnessing the bombs bursting in air and the rocket's red glare. And he wrote this whole poem. And part of that poem became the Star Spangled Banner, which for a long time was our unofficial national anthem. It became our official national anthem in 1931. So like 117 years later, it became our national anthem. All right, so after being turned back to Fort McHenry, the British also lost a couple of other battles, Plattsburgh on Lake Champlain being one of those. And really, Great Britain at this point realized there was little to gain from continuing the war. So even though America had declared war, Britain came right back and was trying to win this thing. They realized there wasn't much to gain. So they said, hey, why don't we have some peace talks and figure out, work out some compromises and work out our issues without fighting. So they actually negotiate a peace treaty on December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1814, officially ending the war, or what they thought. Remember, though, this is a time where there's no phones, no internet, no Twitter, no Snapchat, TikTok, nothing to pass information on. And so the treaty is signed in the country of Belgium, because you always pick a third party, kind of a neutral nation. So you're not going to have the peace treaty in America, and you're not going to have it in Great Britain. So they had it in Belgium, which is why it's called the Treaty of Ghent. Ghent is a city in Belgium. And that basically negotiated peace between the two countries. And the war is ended. Basically, it's considered a draw or a tie, or you'll sometimes hear the term stalemate. Okay, so nobody was declared victor. Nobody gained land from anybody. They just the war ended. Even the issue of impressment, one of the big reasons we went to war, was not really addressed, but had kind of faded out on its own anyway throughout the war itself. Now, unfortunately, nobody hears about this, because remember, this is done in Belgium, so it's got to be put on a ship, and they got to sail one copy to Great Britain and one copy to the States. And so nobody really knows. So 2 weeks after the treaty was signed, but it had not been officially ratified yet, the British were trying to take control of New Orleans, a valuable port city. And a guy named General Andrew Jackson basically led some U.S. forces with some very creative tactics. First of all, he brought in kind of a ragtag group, pirates, freed slaves, Choctaw Indians, sailors, farmers, frontiersmen, anybody he could find to fight against the regular U.S. troops and the local militia. It was really muddy after a big storm, and Jackson used cotton bales that he had secured from some southern plantations, used the cotton bales to basically squish them down in the mud and kind of create a better platform for his soldiers to march over, and also to roll the cannons over, and was actually able to defeat the British pretty easily. The British lost over 2,000 soldiers at the Battle of New Orleans, whereas America only lost 71. So it was a good old-fashioned stomping that Jackson had used there with, again, putting together kind of an eclectic fighting group and using the cotton bales to his advantage in the South as well. He becomes a national hero, and he is going to go on to become our 7th president. We'll have a talk about him for a few days here coming up. So this victory, while it wasn't needed because it happened after the treaty was signed, it definitely was significant because it ensured that the treaty would get ratified. It definitely signaled an end to the war. So the war officially goes from 1812 to 1815. Many Americans consider the War of 1812 a victory for them, especially after what happened at New Orleans, but officially it was considered a draw or a tie. All right, what were some of the results or effects of the war? Number one, America proved she could defend herself. This is now twice she's went toe-to-toe with Great Britain, defeated them in the Revolution, and all but defeated Britain in War of 1812. And so her independence is now respected around the world. Patriotism and nationalism increases. People start to really embrace the idea of America and the United States of America. Americans started to see the need for a powerful national government with strong leadership. And this is coming from Democratic Republicans. Remember, Democratic Republicans were very much about states' rights early in Jefferson's presidency. And, America kind of as a whole now realized that we do need this powerful federal government with a powerful military. I mentioned Andrew Jackson becoming a national hero. Manufacturing increases in the U.S. Remember, we had a lot of trade issues where we couldn't import things from Great Britain and even some other countries when the blockade was happening. So Americans had to start developing items on their own. This also coincides with a big influx in the Industrial Revolution and the factory system, which we'll talk about next chapter. Indian resistance in the West is weakened. This increases westward expansion. There are no Indian alliances, at least temporarily for the time being, now that Tecumseh and the Red Stick Confederacy were defeated. And the Federalist Party, which had initially opposed the war and had even talked about separating from the United States and creating their own country to not be a part of this war, and they were very anti-war. Really, this war brought a lot of good things to America, and the Federalist Party, which had been very outspoken about it, kind of had egg on their face afterwards, and they lost power, and really their party ceased to exist shortly after the War of 1812. And for a while, there was only one political party, and that was the Democratic Republicans. All right, that's the War of 1812. Thanks for sticking around.